And thank you for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you all being here to join us for the first of our three-part web series on technology workforce. I'm Kim Christ, and I'm the director of SE Tech and Cybersec SE. SE Tech is the newest initiative of South Carolina Council on Competitiveness, a business-led nonprofit which for nearly 20 years has supported business clusters in South Carolina. Currently also SE Aerospace, SE Logistics, Fraunhofer SC, and Transform SC, as well as SE Tech and Cybersec. SE Tech focuses on advancing the technology economy of South Carolina. We bring together technology leaders, government, education, and support organizations across the state for thought leadership, solutions building, and support of the technology cluster. In the last year, we've established the first ever SE Tech Economic Impact Study, which showed an $89 billion impact to the state's economy. And we also launched our GIS-enabled heat map of the state's technology resources and assets. Those are both on the SE Tech website under the South Carolina Council on Competitiveness for your usage. We're also working on our pathway mapping, which identifies all opportunities for South Carolina students, whether they are in K-12 higher ed or outside of the formal educational setting, how they can achieve careers in technology. And then to make sure that we stayed really busy, we are also working on the first SE Tech mission for strategic missions for the state, which allows us to pull together all of those resources to plan for the voice of South Carolina as a unified presence to ensure we're competitive on a national and international stage. If any of you are interested in becoming an SE Tech partner or providing feedback for any of the programs I mentioned, or any programs that you feel like we should be talking about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But on to the reason why we're all here today. We have a fantastic panel to talk about retention and culture in a remote working world. Just last month, nearly a year and a half after the start of the COVID pandemic, Microsoft announced that it would not set a return date for its employees. So is remote work here to stay? Well, yes, the experts agree it is here to stay. In fact, Lister recently projected that by 2025, 70% of jobs could be remote for at least 5 days a month, 70% of all jobs. However, according to a recent LinkedIn survey, only about half of their polled executives said they're ready and able to adopt a remote or hybrid work environment culture permanently. Yet 39% of those same executives admitted that they were having very difficult times filling their jobs. So in contrast, when we look at the workforce, 74% of employees who are currently working remotely say they plan to stay remote, even if that means moving jobs or reducing their salary by up to 10%. So how did we fare in the technology business cluster? Since technology workers were already the second largest remote workforce in the US, did we feel any impacts? Yep, we sure did. And sometimes not in the ways that we imagined. Large technology companies across the US are seeing a shift in their employees who want to live in more affordable and livable markets. And it's making our technology workforce unpinned to any geographic region. So what does that do for South Carolina? Well, we already know that in South Carolina, our technology companies are employing people far and wide across the globe to fill their talent needs, and that we are already competing in a really tough talent market. But it has other implications for us. Our companies are now competing in national talent pools with national and international tech companies. So South Carolina technology workers are being offered jobs in bigger markets without the need to locate, but with the larger market pay scales. So how do we compete? What do we do to create a culture and retain a workforce in an increasingly remote landscape? Do we follow the likes of Vermont and Oklahoma, Massachusetts and Utah that are creating programs and incentives around living and being remote? Maybe. Let's see what our experts think today as we discuss all of these issues. Join me in welcoming to our panel. First up, Suzie Rybicki is the VP of People Operations at Phish Labs, a Charleston-based cybersecurity company providing digital risk protection through curated threat intelligence and mitigation. Suzie joined Phish Labs leadership as employee number 42 in February of 2015, where she was able to build out the people ops and the organizational development strategy from scratch. Throughout her career, she has enjoyed volunteering her time and expertise in leadership roles with organizations such as Chicago SHRM and Chicago Chamber of Commerce. Since moving to Charleston in 2015, she has served on the Charleston Open Source Committee and has chaired it for the past 2 years. And then in 2020, she joined the board of directors at the Charleston Women in Tech, where she leads the programs committee. Thanks, Suzie, for joining us. Next up, John Miller. John is a principal program manager at Microsoft. He is responsible for access control and data protection for Microsoft Cloud Services. He lives and works in Colombia, but he has teams and customers around the world. And I know personally, John is very invested in his community, mentoring and volunteering in organizations that help build up the next leaders in the tech workforce. Thanks for being here, John. Christina Roberts is the Pillar Lead Software Engineer and Architect at Apploi. She is part of the leadership of Women Who Code and is a big proponent for expanding the technology field with people from non-traditional educational backgrounds. Christina is inspiring others through her own journey and personal story of success using non-traditional pathways into a technology career. Thanks for being here, Christina. And last but not least, Tim Davis is the Director of Cybersecurity Risk and Architecture at Benefitfocus. As the Director of Cybersecurity at Benefitfocus, Tim is responsible to the Chief Information Security Officer for risk management, vulnerability and configuration management, penetration testing, application security, governance, and architecture design. Tim has over 15 years experience as a leader in technology and security fields for military, government, and private sector. He's been with Benefitfocus for the last 8 years, and he lives on Daniel Island, just outside of Charleston. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from Old Dominion University, and he maintains his CISSP and GSLC certifications. Hey, Tim, and thanks for being here. So we're gonna jump right in. Let's dive into our questions. And I'm gonna lead off with Suzie on this first question. Now that South Carolina companies are competing for tech talent in this international work pool, what do we do? What do we do to compete to fill these jobs that we have in South Carolina?
Yeah, Kim, it's a great question. And first of all, thanks for having us here. I think it's such an important topic to discuss. And it's interesting because being in Charleston, I've never really had a problem convincing talent to come and relocate to South Carolina, especially being in Charleston. You know, we have the beaches, the great restaurants, the southern charm of the peninsula. But to your point earlier, what I think has drastically changed over the last year and a half is that all this amazing talent that has come into our backyard over the last 5 to 10 years, they have so many more options than they ever did before. So they can easily work remote for a Chicago or LA or Boston-based company and make a lot more money than historically what we've been able to pay, you know, in the South Carolina region. And so I think what's really had to happen from an HR and leadership perspective is elevate, and step up our game as far as paying salaries so that they are more competitive with nationwide market salaries versus what we've used in the Low Country or in South Carolina overall. And the companies that haven't kind of stepped up their game, they're feeling the attrition issues for sure. And I'd say the other thing too, more about what all employers need to do, is not just the South Carolina issue, but if you're in HR or talent management or just people management, you really have to change the way you lead your employees. It has to be kind of, lead with empathy, people first mentality, and make sure that those employees, it's more than just the paycheck alone, but it's how do these employees feel like they're adding value to the company and to what you're trying to accomplish. And if you don't have that direct connection with them, you lose them very easily. So especially with those A players, companies need to make sure that they're managing very differently going forward.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add into that before we move on to the next question? All right, well, it actually tees us up really well for the next question, which is about onboarding, which we know is one of the hardest things to do remotely. Hire in someone during a time like COVID where you can't onboard them in person. So what do we do when hiring talent? What's an effective strategy to engage and onboard new remote employees so they have the buy-in and that team dynamic feel? Tim, can you take this one for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one of the things that we do at Benefitfocus that's been encouraged through our leadership development is clear communication strategies. So once you have someone who joins your team, you make sure they know who to talk to, when you're available, what meetings they need to join, and who within the company are go-to resources. And then once they have those communication strategies in place, you get one-to-one contact for alignment with the direct manager. And then one thing that I've tried to do is video when possible. So instead of being a voice or being someone who's appearing as text, that you are a tangible person. One thing that I've heard in my career is that people join companies, but they leave managers. So I think a lot of the retention has to do with the leadership strategy that the associate or that the employee sees from their direct manager. So if they feel like they're being supported and that they're being successful in their role and that they have career opportunities, those are all things that can encourage retention once you get them in the door. That's the more struggling part right now.
Absolutely. And so how do companies create that culture and encourage the collaboration that creates that career longevity, especially in a culture where we don't tend to stay with jobs for very long term? John, would you like to answer this one for us?
I would, but I'd like to start with a question back to my panel. I see kind of a difference between remote and distributed. For me, remote says we are headquartered or we have a main office. Most of your team is here, but for whatever reason, you're there. And that's one set of approaches and kind of problems. The other approach I see is full distributed, where there is no headquarters, there is no the boss is on New York time. And what does that look like? And those are kind of different. And I guess open question for the panel there. Do you agree? Do we want to focus on one of those or the other? Because I've got answers for both.
I'd say for us, we live in a world where I think we're probably more remote in that we have a headquarters in Charleston. We have a campus with 3 buildings. As of a year and a half ago, we had approximately 1,000 to 1,500 people working there on a daily basis. So I think that we are more distributed now than we were then in terms of where workforce lives and how people think about that. But I'd say that we are still at least I think within our company, are in the remote mindset rather than the distributed one.
Yeah, John, I would say the same thing at Phish Live. So prior to COVID, less than 10% of our US workforce lived and worked outside of the Charleston office. So the one thing that has been lost throughout this process is, when you're working side by side with your team members or enjoying Taco Tuesday or doing team building activities, like all of that is lost now for new hires coming in because they don't have that relationship already established. So I think, Tim's point is kind of connecting them and communicating and setting expectations are going to be key, but also identifying ways, how do you continue to engage those remote employees knowing it's going to be longer term?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so I think one of the kind of seeds I want to plant here for people is, does remote mean asynchronous for you? If you're a globally distributed team, people are by and large going to be working different hours. For specific meetings or specific projects, yes, you might have to work on Zurich time or work on Hyderabad time or something like that. But generally speaking, we want to be awake when the sun's up and we want to go to bed when it's dark. So I think that is something I've seen that's huge with remote versus distributed teams. Someone needs to put the stake in the ground and say, we log on at 9 a.m. Eastern and we log off at 5 p.m. Eastern or something like that. Again, kind of setting those expectations that, yes, you might not be here, but we still, are collaborating, in East Coast time or in Pacific time or whatever makes sense. Along that, that kind of asynchronous versus synchronous work style, I think there's a huge opportunity or risk for onboarding there for teams and or employees who are good at asynchronous communication, whether that's recording your meetings and editing them so they're consumable, whether that's writing more of what you do, whether that's working through systems that make your work visible to the rest of your team. That's a great way to make your impact felt and seen when you're not necessarily in the office. It's a great way to onboard people who, hey, we understand you're remote. We understand that this is a lot to take in on your first day. Here's everything in writing and that it's up to date. It's also a great way to not portray yourself in the best frame when, this is how we work. These documents haven't been updated in 3 years. The people that wrote them have moved on to other goals, but read it anyway. So if you're going to go down that route, one of the things that we've seen that's been very positive is that is the hire's first job. It's here's our onboarding documentation. Here's the login information. Here's the person on our team who, will order you the new laptop. Here's all of those things. On Friday, we want to review it and, make sure things that are up to date, things that aren't working. This is something that they can do that they don't necessarily have to be hands-on deep in the company culture. Your hire should be good enough that they can take your up-to-date and well-written documentation when it exists and consume it and update it kind of moving forward. And so that's a great way to say like, hey, we understand that, you're not going to be one cube over, you're not going to be across the office from me. But, we see you, we know that you have these needs and we want to provide them to you, but we also want your feedback immediately because your latest hire is the person that knows how relevant those documents are or aren't. I think for those remote employees, another thing that I've seen that's very valuable is identifying mentors, both directly in your team, manager, more senior staff, things like that, but really across teams. For those companies that have, the Starbucks downstairs or a basketball court out back or something like that, it's really easy to pick up some of those, informal social connections that you just wouldn't even know about, working remotely. So having the ability to reach out to people in sister teams or in partner teams or things like that is a great way to maybe get a view of how your work is viewed outside of your team. Who's consuming my work or who am I providing, inputs for and I'm meeting their needs. I think flipping to that, what can companies do? What can managers do? The two things that I think that are most important are one, for managers, modeling and coaching. If you are going to be a kind of remote, we're all going to work together at the same time, wherever you are, that's fine. That means that you have to log on at 9 a.m. and you need to be responsive and things like that. Similarly, if you're maybe delivering code or something like that, and it doesn't matter when or where you do it, just as long as it works and the tests turn green, that's fine too. But then you need to manage to that, and you need to have objective measures to say, hey, this is good work, or this didn't meet our needs. And so those are kind of two ways I see, managers can kind of contribute to that culture. And then I think on the flip side, as employees, what we really need to do is communicate. And in these remote and distributed situations, there's as many reasons to work remote as there are individuals. Some of that will be for family, some of that will be for educational opportunities, or to be closer to healthcare, or for higher pay, lower cost of living. There could be thousands of reasons, and it's really our job as employees to communicate that and say, hey, the thing that's most important to me is the ability to travel. So, trying to contact me after hours isn't going to work because I'm going to be on a plane. Or, hey, I need to be able to take my mom for physical therapy every morning, so I'm going to log on a little later. Where it's available, I think, this is a huge benefit to remote and distributed working. And we just really need to be explicit. It takes a little bit of self-knowledge to say, hey, this is important to me because fill in the blank. But then we need to communicate that with our teams. And really, I think that encourages the rest of our teams to open up a little bit. When I say, no, I'm not ignoring you, I have to take a long, lunch break because I'm picking up my kids or something like that. Again, it's one of those kind of social cues where they could say, oh, actually, I do this because, something else is important to me. My, example, one of my coworkers' sons is working to be a tennis pro. And so she's always online early because she's got to get all of his stuff together, get ready for matches and things like that. So just different ways to communicate, really so many benefits from remote working. So teams know what is important to us and where not to cross the line, but also where we can expect a little flexibility from each other and say, oh, maybe you could log on a little bit earlier because this is closer to your time zone. Or maybe, I know you don't mind working late because you don't have to travel as much. So some of the approaches that I've seen that have been valuable.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too, you say here, John, is if you don't already have this strategy and you don't already have this type of plan in place as a corporate entity, as an organization, it's something that thought needs to go into so that you're being deliberate in the way that you're executing your plan with your remote workers or your distributed workers, as you mentioned, and what is it that you're trying to actually accomplish? Having remote workers that are part of your 9-to-5 day, or are you having people who are able to work at their best work times, best productivity from across the world? So good points.
Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to bring up, while clearly, at a corporate level, that's going to impact the culture, I would expect to see different rules, different approaches for different job types. If we think about customer service, like when I call, I really do need someone to pick up the phone at that point, things like that. Whereas for other things, if the work can be decomposed and reconstructed, either automatically or with low cost, maybe it's not as big as a deal. So I think we all look to corporate leadership for what that looks like. But I really think anyone in a management role needs to look at that and say, really decompose some of that job description and how much of this can be remote, how much of this can be hybrid, how much of this can be distributed. And really, I would expect different answers from different teams.
Agreed.
I'd like to chime in.
Okay, yes, please. I think Tim and Christina both have a response.
You can go ahead, Tim.
Okay. In terms of culture for collaboration for Benefitfocus, I'd say that one of the things that has led us to have good retention rates and career longevity within the company has been sharing that inherited knowledge. So for security specifically, there's a lot of things that you need to know in terms of where the assets are and how we get to them and how we secure them and what our defense in depth strategy is. So having some sort of like wiki style tool, whether it's Confluence or a competitor, allows you to share that knowledge, and it provides some rigidity in terms of like you should document everything that you do. There should be change logs for each tool that you manage, things like that. But it also provides a lot of knowledge and ability to backtrace what people have done, because even if you see, say for instance, I check and I find that one of my associates has edited a page, for the change log and come back and say, okay, why did we make this change? Why was it important? And then be able to share that knowledge with any other team member or anybody outside of our direct department or team. I feel like that helps as well. And then I think John touched on this a little bit, but the idea of having some sort of task management system, whether that's Jira or that's like a Kanban board or Microsoft Planner or whatever you use. Each of those technologies will allow you to see work in progress, what's not done, what hasn't been picked up, and especially when you have a team that operates in an agile method, so you can have different people reach their hand into the bucket of work and then take out whatever they're going to be able to do that day. Having that and being able to see it at a management or leadership level is very, very helpful, because then you can see, one, you can see who your star performers are, because they're the ones who are taking the majority of the work, or that their work that's that they're completing is of higher quality. And then two, it also allows you to understand whether or not your team is under resourced, or if you have a surplus of work hours that you can help other teams with. So each of those, I think, are things that have helped us from a collaboration standpoint in our remote world.
I would agree with everything you're saying, Tim, especially the Notion pages. Those are great to be able to go back and search anytime. And Jira, I'm a huge fan of that. I'd like to add to it that we have to look at the fact that a lot of companies are going remote or distributed for the first time. They're learning. A lot of employees are now remote for the first time. And so I think both sides of the table really have to be, just sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of learning going on. When I change over to my current employer, Apploi, the first week, like, onboarding was great. They came down and met me in person, which I think was a fabulous touch. But one of the most important things that happened is, around the end of week one, I said, sent a message and said, these are, A, B, and C is how I see that things are done here. In order for me to be really successful, I would like to see if we could do X, Y, and Z as well. And as an employee, that's can be a little bit scary or intimidating, especially when you're joining a new company and learning how the ropes are. But they went above and beyond to meet those needs, like extended even more than what I asked for. And it was really successful. And it not only helped them onboard me better, but it helped me, be happy with my job and become a better employee. So just to wrap it up, having both sides of the table feel like they have input, like the needs of both sides are important, is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle that a lot of companies and employees might not quite be used to yet, but I think we all really need to lean into.
Good points all around. Well, Christina, speaking of you switching to employment, you now work for a company that is not in South Carolina. So I wanted to ask, South Carolina is a great place to live, right? We know the cost of living is lower, the quality of life is higher, all that great stuff. So what can we do as a state to really encourage remote technology workers to either stay here or move here and live here versus somewhere else in the world?
I think we really need to make ourselves more visible. We need to let people know that we have great communities here, we have great schools, we have great our nature around here is great. There's lots of activities, but that we also have a very strong technical community. In hubs like Seattle and New York, that's kind of the status quo. Everybody knows it's a tech area, and people are now just kind of discovering that, oh, there is some tech hubs in South Carolina. So we need to make sure that that's visible, and that we're not just having separate initiatives for the different areas that we live in, but that we kind of make a unified front and just let people know that there is a lot of value here in South Carolina, not just for lower cost of living and beautiful scenery, but that there's a robust group of people who love what they do, who care about technology, and who are also really invested in giving back to our community. So we not only have great, work days, but we have a great quality of life in general.
We do, indeed.
I'd like to pile on that one a little bit. I think if we're looking to get tech workers to live in South Carolina long term, a lot of them, may not be in Georgia or in North Carolina, and it's just, a quick drive across the border. These might be, people that could be, anywhere around the world or in the US. And so back to kind of that remote versus distributed discussion, hosting kind of conferences or having some of that distributed work. Oh, while we're working on this special project, we'd like you all to come work with us in Charleston for 2 weeks. Great way to introduce people to the state. Maybe the people who had never considered it before, like, oh, that project went really well, and then I could go out during, the week. That was kind of nice. Maybe we could think about that. And so maybe not necessarily swinging for the fences and getting that employee to uproot and move, which can be, more and more difficult as we look at more and more senior employees who have families, have real estate, have all those things that could make a move more difficult. But to entice them with, we'll be having a technical conference in Greenville, or, oh, hey, we're going to be working on this special project for a month in Columbia, or something like that, is a great way to kind of introduce people without trying to go for the very heavy sell.
Yeah,
I would also add to
Tim,
that.
Suzie? Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that too. I think timing is everything too, because like I said, I never have problems getting people to relocate to South Carolina, especially if they're coming from up north. So the idea of having a conference in Charleston in February when you're dealing with Siberia in Chicago or Boston is like the perfect time to get them acclimated. The one thing I would add, and I would tell you, like being part of Charleston Open Source and SC Tech, I think there's so many great things that we're all collectively trying to do. Like instead of looking at a regional base, trying to collect it all and share best practices statewide, which is great. The one area where I'm still a little disappointed is more like from an infrastructure perspective. So we're always on the best places to live award list, and everyone's moving here, but yet, again, the infrastructure really isn't supporting it to the best of its ability. So I think I just read a couple of weeks ago, the I-26 extension, the expansion efforts are actually being accelerated, which is amazing. But quite honestly, that should have happened 5 to 10 years ago. So I think we're a little bit behind the game from that perspective. But if the state can do something more, I think it's more about now that people relocate here, how do we ensure it's productive to get from one place to another?
Well, that actually leads us perfectly into the next question on how do we embrace and support technology workers that locate here or are from here to encourage, that longevity, that livability. What are the things that we can be doing to embrace those workers? And John, I'll lead off with you on that.
Sure.
Because
so I
you
will
live here and work elsewhere.
Yeah, no problem. So I will absolutely agree 150% with Suzie's comment. Some of this is going to have to come from our leadership at the state level. In addition to competing with jobs, we're also competing with quality of life, quality of education, quality of healthcare, quality of environment, all of those things. And so it can be difficult for a great company in a bad place to kind of compete to bring people in. So that's a great point. One thing I think we can do as businesses, especially some of these larger businesses that have campuses that have real estate, is look at now that we are working more remote, working more distributed, can we be more creative with those spaces? Can we treat some of those spaces like incubator spaces? Can we make them more open, more working spaces? In some cases, we can actually make money off of this. Oh, we're renting out a wing that we weren't using. We're making money every month. In other cases, it'll be a little more indirect where, yes, we host this user group for, 4 hours every Wednesday or something like that, or we host a co-working space downstairs or something like that. And I would be willing to bet over time, more and more of the hires, especially the ones that end up being high performers, end up coming from some of these places because they're kind of warm sells. They know the culture, they've met multiple employees. They're not necessarily coming in, net new. I think both from the, corporation side and really tech worker side, sharing education and social is really a great way to skill up our workers, whether this is user groups or, shared education. I'll put in a little pitch here for SC Codes, which is available statewide in your browser at sccodes.org. So if you want to learn coding for free, definitely check that out. But really for every stage in the career, coming together in conferences and user groups and things like that is a great way both to develop our technical skills, kind of those hard skills, but also those soft skills of, oh, who is hiring in my town? I didn't even know about this company, and they've got all of these openings and things like that. And so I think that's something that is really on all of us to contribute more. Just as a personal aside, I've been shocked how many South Carolina people I have met everywhere except South Carolina. So Seattle, New York, LA, wherever, we get to talking. Where do you live? Oh, I'm traveling this week. I'm from South Carolina. And so, yeah, very interesting where that works. And again, for companies, a great way to get yourself out there, especially if you're concerned with either, hiring or retention, is to be visible in these tech circles. If you're always hosting the user groups and people come to the user group at your campus and other people are talking about how, oh, well, Phish Labs is a great place to work. And of course I've been contributing to this user group because my manager supports me in that. That's a great chance to maybe poach some of the more engaged employees from your competitors.
Yeah, great points. And Christina, you have a good bit of experience in this as well, in community building and the community you're in as a remote worker. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of what has led you to feel so at home in your region?
So I think that just all comes down to the fact that we have really great people here. And there's a lot of opportunities to kind of go out and serve in whatever interests you. So we have things like Women in Code. We have Code for Greenville, which is like a social kind of coding platform. We have the local Carolina Code School here that they're always looking for people to input. As John said, SC Codes, with lots of great mentors here. Some of the best people I know, they're always available and willing to help. So I think all these opportunities for people who have experience to kind of come in and serve and give back their time. And also they're the same opportunities that people who are interested in this field or maybe just want to step their toe in and see what it's like, that they have a place to land and they have some people to connect to and to learn from. And maybe, one of the things I love about SC Codes especially is that you can kind of be anonymous to start. You can kind of just poke around, see what's there, but there's always people there to help you. They've been doing a lot of live events online and webinars and things like that too. So I think just having those available and increasing exposure and just having the intertwined community that we have is a really huge asset and helps stabilize us as not just a place to come and buy a house while you work from your bedroom or your office, but that you can be actively participating with other like-minded people, with people who are passionate about the same things you are. And, bottom line is the technology field is a wonderful avenue for people in this area. There's a lot of really low-paying jobs, and it's kind of hard to find opportunities a lot of times, but this is a great opportunity for so many people in South Carolina. And it's unique in a lot of ways compared to some of the things that are offered here. And it's definitely a different route that you don't have to do a 4-year, college to get into. College is great, wonderful, but it's not for everybody, and it may not fit everybody's lifestyle at the time that they're looking to change careers. But when I first started getting into tech here, literally the very first thing that really blew me away was how willing everybody was to give of themselves, give of their time. When I was still in code school, someone came and they were having a conference and came and talked to us and invited us there. I went, and in that one conference, got introduced to 50 amazing people that I still am in contact with and ask messages about things every once in a while for advice. So that is it's vital. The community here, growing it and keeping it strong is vital, and it's probably our best asset, to be honest.
Great. Suzie, Tim, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I'd just say that to piggyback on the local organizations, so things like OWASP chapters are also good local organizations, specifically within the security world, that you can meet, network, and also encourages people to stay in the area. So if you build those personal connections with the people in the area with you, then you have things that tie you here rather than it just being a place where your house is, like she said.
Well, Tim, just to kind of add to that question a little bit, what are the benefits of working and living in the same geographical region over working remotely? Or is there something we should be looking at there as a pros and cons?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that kind of is a question that depends on the company. So one thing that I know, at least for us, we have a lot of partnerships with local businesses. So there's things like reduced prices. You can get free River Dogs tickets. You can do local events. There's we won the South Carolina Great Places to Work Award a while back, and all of those things sort of came together to say, hey, if you are in the area, then these perks are still available to you just because of the relationships that we've already established. Now, if we weren't so established within South Carolina, I think it might be a little different. The fact that our HR team and our community outreach is so strong, I think that's one thing that makes Benefitfocus attractive to live in South Carolina, is that you have all these perks, and then there's also the availability to do in-office work if you don't have a home workspace that works for you. So being able to come in, say if your team is one that's interested in part-time work at the office, you can say, okay, every Friday we'll get together, and that's when we'll do our meeting, and the rest of the time we'll work from home. So I think there definitely are benefits living in South Carolina and then having an office location in South Carolina, even as someone who right now is working full-time remote. I'd say those are the things that I see, but again, I think it's very dependent on the company.
That's a good point. And Suzie, you actually crafted, this whole, feel and culture at Phish Labs. So what were you looking at when you were thinking about the experience between working in person versus working remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it was a lot of feedback requests. So it's sort of like Christina said, like employers are learning just as much as employees are through this process, unless you've worked at an organization where everyone was distributed or everyone was historically remote. This is brand new territory for us. So I've done a ton of formal and informal kind of feedback sessions with folks. And what I've learned, and not even just within Phish Labs, but within the world and my friends and my family, what I hear from them is they love the idea of working remote the majority of the time, and they want to continue to do that. And oh, by the way, they know they have that option with other companies. So it's sort of like, be careful what you try to take away from me. But in the same respect, they do miss coming to that brick and mortar building, even if it's only 1 day a week or 2 days a month, just to have, they miss Taco Tuesday. They want to be there for all hands meetings. They want to do happy hours and just reconnect with those folks. So that's the way Phish Labs has looked at it is, again, we're leaving it up to the employees. We've had our office open on a volunteer basis, and some folks actually want to get away and come to the office. Maybe they have small children, maybe they're just more productive in the office. And I think that's what we're going to do long-term is we will never force anyone. We continue to hire folks remotely, but we want to meet them where they're at and make sure that we're meeting their needs overall.
And John, I'm curious because your job is designed, right, to work within teams all across the world, right? So you already were in this, direction of traveling and working all across the world with different people at different times. So what do you see as, the benefits of being, in a team that might be across the world versus, right here in your backyard?
Sure. I think ideally, in building those kind of, best of breed global teams, it really comes down to kind of team composition. And I don't want to say like, only A players or anything like that, but, it really is a recipe. And so you need to make sure that you kind of get the right mix of the right people at the right times. Some people may be incredible at testing, they do test automation, they do all of that, super great. We need to be pretty close to done before we're going to bring you on board. Or similarly, things like that, you run into coordination kind of issues. One thing that I have seen with kind of remote work and distributed work, a huge benefit for, localism is the industry knowledge. Sure, we can, we want to say, hey, I'm looking for a web developer. I need the best web developer in the world. I'm going to go out and try to find them online. Okay, those are technical skills, generally pretty straightforward to assess. Now, hey, I need an integration developer who really knows banking laws in the Caribbean because I'm a Miami-based bank, and that's how that works. Technical skills are important. They're always going to be important, but they're not necessarily, they're required but not sufficient for some of our jobs. And so I would look at South Carolina, looking at those industries where we are leaders, you know, whether it's aerospace, whether it's cybersecurity and some of those things. Sure, if I'm working remote, you know, maybe I have to go find a job on my technical skills. But if I'm in the community, if I know, hey, these are these big aerospace firms that are hiring, or oh, my friend at this cyber firm just told me about this, I can move in the same industry while having kind of more generic technical skills.
Great. And Christina, you have experience in this as well as working for a local company in the community you live in versus now working for a national company outside of your market. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Couldn't have one Zoom meeting without that happening, right? Yeah, it's different. And I never really planned on not working for a South Carolina company because I am so passionate about our community. But there's a lot to offer here locally. And like John said, you get a lot more value whenever you know the local community, you know the people, you know our jobs that are going on, and kind of can fit into a more niche set. But the bottom line is that there's opportunity, you know, people can find what they love to do everywhere. The bottom line is that you enjoy, you know, your job, you enjoy what you're doing, but there is a lot of value in being able to know exactly what's around you versus kind of just shooting for the stars and seeing, you know, just randomly what's out there.
Great. We're going to shift focus just a minute here. Tim, I'm going to ask you a little bit about cybersecurity and the security of data. Should companies be worried about their data security with a remote workforce? What are the tools or the procedures that they should be looking at to help ensure that they're productive but secure?
At the risk of sounding like a security guy, yes, they should be worried about their data security. I think first tools, I think some of the tools that are widely recognized but also very effective are things that are standard practice in a lot of data security programs. So things like VPN or having multi-factor authentication. If you don't want to use VPN, another option is to do reverse proxy for your web applications hosted internally. So one thing you can do is you can enforce machine certificates. So anyone in the world can try to connect to your network, but only if they have that company specific certificate they can join. And then I think in terms of procedures, one of the big things that I would say is training. Training is huge. Phish labs, I think Suzie probably has a lot to say about training in terms of phishing emails, but I would say that also training in terms of what is appropriate, what is expected for how someone works, whether if they work with HIPAA data or they work with PCI data or they work with something that's heavily audited. I think that it makes a big difference. And then also depending on if you have like call centers or support staff, then how and where they work from is important too. So if you work as a call center agent, but you're working out of Starbucks, then that's very different than if you're working as a call center agent out of a secure space or out of a clean room or out of your home. Each of those, I think, have different security implications. And they also have customer implications too, because if you have people who aren't working out of the traditional clean room model for a call center or something like that, then certain customers won't even do business with you. They'll say, hey, if you don't support taking away people's devices before they look at our data, then we won't engage you as a vendor. So figuring out how to do that messaging to your customers and then figuring out what the best way for you to provide secure access to your internal resources is very important.
Absolutely, John. I see you nodding your head. And Suzie, I know this is a really familiar topic for you too, with cloud architecture, John, that you work in, and Suzie, clearly Phish Labs focuses on this as well. Do either of you have something you'd like to input?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, everything Tim said makes perfect sense. I agree 100%. One of the other things that we noticed, and I think we maybe took for granted because we didn't historically have everyone work remote, is even just the simple general security awareness and training our folks to say, hey, you know, it's really not appropriate to have your, you know, your elementary school kid doing their homework on your laptop computer that is meant for work purposes. So, you know, clean desk also means a lot at home, making sure that people within your family aren't even getting access to your data and to your computer. So it's those little things that you just have to drive home, because Tim's point is well taken. I mean, you have client obligations, you just have shareholder obligations that I think sometimes could be overlooked if you're not very serious about that security vigilance.
Indeed. Well, we have one more question before we open it up to questions from our audience. And this one is just kind of sum it up. Does culture, community, and mission have value as part of the employment package, or does it all boil down to a paycheck? Christina, you want to take it?
Sure. So I think that culture and community definitely has extreme value in the company. You know, in the field that we work in, we know that we have skills that are needed. We know that it's a stressful job. And it's not just make a product and you know, you have something to hold in your hand at the end of the day. It's a little more involved. So having people that you can trust, that you can communicate clearly with, that you're not afraid to ask questions with, is super important. And to be honest, you know, this is a time in the technology field where companies are really, really having to compete to get good and top talent. So although we all need paychecks and we want to be paid well for our time, and, you know, that is obviously important, nowadays, it's not choosing culture over a paycheck. Nowadays, people want both of them. And so in the big picture, lots of companies around the world know this. You know, they know that they have to not just give people cups and sweaters and things like that, but they have to actually let their employees know that they do care about them as human beings and not just as how many tickets can you get done this week. And that is going to produce better output for your company anyways. You're going to get better work done. You're going to get employees that actually care about what they're producing and want to make a good effect for the company that they work for. So yes, everybody wants to get paid, and we are in a international market now. So South Carolina companies have to be aware of the national standard and the international standard for pay. But we also have to make sure to have a updated mindset and to communicate those values very clearly, especially coming from people have assumptions about the South, and whether, you know, most of them are not true anymore, but we need to be working extra hard to communicate what our values are as companies, as an employees. So yes, culture, community, huge, huge value. And I would dare say it is equal to pay, if not more. We all just want to be able to enjoy what we do good work, and provide for our families and support.
Absolutely. And Suzie, what do you see when you're hiring, since you are the VP over people operations? Are you seeing, when you're reaching out in this international job pool of candidates, that the culture is equal to the pay?
Yeah, when I talk to candidates, it certainly is. They want both, as Christina said. And it's funny because I'm a big research person. So McKinsey actually just did a research study that they released last week. And it was so interesting because the whole topic was about employers can't fix what they don't understand. So what they did is they researched employees across, you know, the US, I think it was just US based or North America, and what employers assume is important, and compensation was one of those things, or always working remote. But what it came back as is that's not as important to employees. Yes, they want to feel like they're fairly compensated. They want to be able to make a good living, but at the end of the day, they want to feel, value from their manager. They want to feel connection with the company. So establishing that culture and that mission is absolutely critical. And I hear that every day from candidates too.
Good feedback. Anybody else? John, Tim, do you have anything you want to add before we open up to questions?
Yeah, just kind of last part on that. So, we've talked about, attracting potential employees and bringing them on board. Culture is also really important for retaining them. And over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of tech talent leave companies because of contracts that signed that said, no, you know what, I don't feel comfortable selling my technology for this use. And so if companies, the same way we're looking at employees to say, hey, it can't be about every last dollar, culture is important too. Companies that chase every last dollar of revenue at the expense of culture will find it very difficult to retain staff.
I'd like to input again also. When it comes to culture, you cannot make a Notion page or a wiki for how to do culture. You actually have to care. And I'd just like to brag on my current company because it's a great example. So I had a couple days going on where there was just a lot going on between life and work and everything. Like, it was really overwhelming. And my company's way of showing their values and the culture is they just messaged me out of the blue. They said, hey, let us deliver dinner to your house, because I'm a single mom with a teenager and 8-year-old boys make messes. And the last thing I wanted to do that day was go to the grocery store, pick up something to cook for dinner, cook it, and clean it up. And so even though it's a very simple thing for them to do, they thought about, hey, as Christina, as a person, what can we do to make her life easier today? Because we care about her and we value her. And they picked something that was specifically helpful and kind for me, being a woman and a single mother. And so putting that thought and that extra care into your culture, and not just trying to make it, black and white paper. And, if it's situation A, we do this. That's not the way to go. Just be human, be real, and actually caring about your employees is the way to go for that.
I love that story, Christina. Thanks for sharing it. Tim, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I'd say that culture, obviously very important. And I think it is dependent on the individual too, because some people will look at the number and say, that's the only thing that's important to me. But I think that is the people who do look only at the number are, or at least seem to be, a dying breed, where now people do want both. And and I've actually seen instances where people have left jobs to come to Benefitfocus, who have taken pay cuts where they didn't necessarily need to, just because they said, this manager, this leadership team, this work structure that I'm under is not something with which I will continue to put up. So I think that if we can create a culture at Benefitfocus or at any other SC Tech company, that we can retain that top talent once they come, because even if someone comes for a pay reduction and then you get them that pay bump up to the level that they were at or above that level, then they're going to understand that I left for this culture. Now I'm at a place where I'm comfortable with what I'm being paid and how I'm being treated. And then that's how you get long-term retention. So, I mean, even within my team, I haven't had anyone turn over for 3 years, which is, I think, very rare in the tech space. So I think that being able to provide that sort of knowledge to the person that works for you, that, hey, I care about you and I care about putting you in a good situation in both your financial and your work life. I think that's really important. So.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much to all of you for being part of this panel. We're bumping right up on our hour mark, but I did want to give the opportunity, if anybody had any questions. Adrienne Beasley, our Director of Strategy and Communications, is kind of fielding those. Adrienne, were there any questions that we missed?
Nothing in the chat that we didn't already cover. I will say that the recording from today will go out to everybody that registered for the webinar, so you can expect to get that in the next week.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you coming and listening today. And if you have any further questions or any questions for this panel, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'll try and connect you in. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.